The night I told my best friend she deserved better, I meant every word of it. I just didn't expect her to turn around, look me dead in the eyes, and say, "You," not as a joke, not as a deflection, as an answer. My name is Daniel Calloway. I was 33, a structural engineer at a mid-sized firm in Columbus, and I had spent the better part of 4 years being the kind of friend who shows up. The moving kind, the 2 a.m. kind, the sit on your kitchen floor while you cry kind, the kind who drives to the grocery store at 10 p.m. because she ran out of coffee and couldn't face tomorrow without it. I was very good at showing up. I was significantly worse at admitting why. Her name was Claire Maddox. She was 31, a copy editor at a local publishing house, and the kind of person who could fix your grammar, your argument, and your entire worldview in the same sentence without making you feel small. She had dark red hair she kept in a braid over one shoulder when she was working and let loose when she was done pretending the day hadn't exhausted her. She laughed too loud for quiet rooms, and not loud enough in places where it wouldn't matter. She read 3 books at once and finished all of them. She made terrible coffee and excellent decisions, except in one specific department that had been slowly breaking my heart for 2.5 years. His name was Marcus. I'm going to keep this short because Marcus doesn't deserve more words than necessary. He was charming in the way that costs other people, attentive when an audience existed, apologetic in the specific style of men who know an apology is cheaper than change. Claire had been with him for just over 2 years when I first noticed the signs. The way she stopped talking about her weekend plans. The way she laughed a little too quickly when someone asked how things were going. The way she had started keeping her phone face down in a way she never used to. I said nothing for a long time. That was my first mistake. The second was convincing myself that silence was kindness. It came to a head on a Tuesday in February. Not a dramatic Tuesday. Not a movie Tuesday with rain and meaningful lighting. A regular Tuesday where the office heat was broken and I had eaten the same disappointing sandwich for the third day in a row and Claire had texted me at 3:47 in the afternoon. "Can you come over tonight?" I typed back. Already on my way, which was not technically true yet but became true within 4 minutes. When I got to her apartment, she was sitting on the kitchen counter in sweatpants and a university hoodie that was definitely mine originally, holding a mug of something hot with both hands like it was the only warm thing in the building. Her eyes were dry. That was the part that got me. Not red, not puffy, just tired in a way that goes deeper than sleep. She said, "He forgot again." I set my keys on the counter. What did he forget? My sister's gallery opening. She looked down at her mug. I reminded him 4 times. I even put it in his calendar myself. He went to a work thing instead, didn't text until after. I leaned against the counter across from her. The kitchen was the kind of small that made 2 people standing in it feel like a decision. What did he say when he called? That he lost track of time. She gave a short exhale that wasn't quite a laugh. And that the work thing was important. Your sister's first gallery opening wasn't important? She looked at me then. He said he'd make it up to me. I had heard that sentence before. In different arrangements, different tones, but the same essential architecture. Marcus was fluent in the language of making things up to people. The problem was his debt kept accumulating faster than his payments. I said carefully, "What did you say?" I said okay. She stared at her mug. I always say okay. The kitchen hummed quietly between us. Her refrigerator made that sound it always made, the low mechanical complaint I had told her twice to get looked at, and she had ignored twice because she didn't want to deal with the landlord. On the windowsill, a small succulent she had named Gerald leaned toward the streetlight outside like it had somewhere better to be. Claire said quietly, almost to herself, "I don't know why I keep expecting him to be different." And that was the thing. That was the specific sentence that broke something open in me. Not anger, not frustration. Something sadder. Because the woman sitting on that counter was one of the most honest, most clear-eyed people I knew. She could see through weak writing and weak arguments and weak excuses with frightening precision. She edited other people's stories for a living. She knew when a narrative didn't hold up. Except with this one. "Claire," I said, She looked up. You deserve better than this. The words came out quiet, but they landed. I could see them land. Her expression didn't collapse. It did something smaller. It settled, like a sentence finally finding its correct punctuation. She was quiet for a moment. Then she set her mug down on the counter beside her knee, looked at me directly with those steady gray eyes that I had spent 4 years carefully not thinking about too much, and said two words. Like you? I want to tell you I handled that with grace. I want to tell you I said something honest and clear, and that the whole thing resolved itself in one clean, brave conversation. What actually happened was that I made a sound that was not a word, turned and opened her refrigerator for no reason, stared at 3 condiments and a leftover container, and closed it again. That was not what I meant, I said to the refrigerator door. Wasn't it? I turned back. Claire hadn't moved. She was still on the counter, arms crossed loosely, watching me with the expression she used when she already knew the answer, and was deciding whether to be kind about it. I was talking about Marcus, I said. You deserve someone who shows up. You show up. As your friend. Daniel. Her voice was different when she said my name that time. Not teasing, not careful, just real. The way she said it when something mattered. I crossed my arms because apparently my body had decided a defensive posture was the right response to honesty. You're going through something, and I said, this isn't the right moment for what? For this conversation. Then when? She tilted her head. When is the right moment? Because I've been waiting for you to have it for about 2 years and you keep finding very creative reasons not to. That landed squarely in the center of my chest. That's not fair. It's extremely fair. She said it without any heat. I'm not angry, I'm just accurate. I stared at her. You've been waiting for me. She held my gaze and said nothing. You're with Marcus. For a little while longer, probably. Claire, I'm not asking you to fix anything tonight. She picked up her mug again. I'm just tired of the two of us performing a very elaborate dance and calling it friendship. I sat down on the kitchen chair that didn't match the table, the wobbly one she kept meaning to replace because my legs had decided they were done with this conversation standing up. How long? I asked. She looked toward Gerald the succulent. A small smile crossed her face and disappeared. Longer than is comfortable to say out loud. I drove home that night without turning the radio on. That sounds like a small thing. It isn't. I always had the radio on. Music, talk radio, anything that made the car feel less like a container for thoughts. But that night I drove 20 minutes home in complete silence and let everything settle. She had said it out loud. More than that, she had been waiting for me to say it first. I thought about the first time we met, which was at a mutual friend's birthday dinner, where she had argued confidently and incorrectly about the structural logistics of a building in downtown Columbus, and I had corrected her. And she had looked at me with genuine delight instead of offense and said, "Oh, good. A person with specialized opinions. I have been so bored." I thought about the night her father was in the hospital and I sat in a waiting room chair for 6 hours reading a magazine I didn't care about, because she didn't want to sit alone and she didn't want to have to say that out loud. I thought about every time she had laughed at something I said with that specific laugh she had, the one that arrived before she could decide whether to allow it. I pulled into my driveway, sat in the car for another 4 minutes, and then I called my older sister because she was the only person I knew who would tell me the truth, without either celebrating prematurely or making it strange. My sister picked up on the second ring. I could hear her television in the background. Claire told me I should be with her, I said. A pause. Finally, my sister said, you knew? Daniel, everybody knew. The only two people on Earth who didn't know were you and apparently Marcus. I leaned back against the headrest. I didn't know she felt the same. Yes, you did. I suspected. You knew. I did know. That was the uncomfortable truth sitting in the passenger seat of my car. I had known, or close enough to knowing, that the difference was mostly about fear. I had built a very convincing argument that protecting our friendship meant staying in my lane, and I had been telling myself that story long enough that it had started to feel like wisdom instead of cowardice. She's still with Marcus, I said. For a little while longer, probably, my sister said, which were almost exactly Claire's words. Did she call you? She didn't have to. A pause. What are you gonna do? I stared at my dark kitchen window. I don't know yet. Yes, you do. I gave it 3 days, not because I was calculating, because I genuinely thought Claire needed space. After what had clearly been an emotional night, and because I needed to be sure I was walking towards something real and not just toward the warm feeling of being wanted when I had spent the evening feeling helpless. She texted on day 2. Nothing significant. A photo of a bad book cover she was editing with the caption, "This is what I do for money." I sent back a structural diagram I had drawn incorrectly on purpose. She sent back a laughing emoji and nothing else. On day 3, I called her. She answered immediately. Hi. I sat on my couch with my elbows on my knees. I've been thinking, terrifying, about what you said. A pause. I said a lot of things. The one about the dance. She went quiet, not the uncomfortable kind. The kind that means something is being let in carefully. I've been doing it too, I said. Not just you. I kept telling myself it was about protecting what we had. But that was mostly about me not wanting to be wrong about how you felt. And now? Now I know how you feel. Another pause, smaller this time. And I think I've been in love with you since the birthday dinner where you were wrong about the Brennan building and immediately became my favorite person. The exhale that came through the phone was the kind that's been living behind the ribs for a long time. She said, "That was a very long time ago. I'm aware. We wasted a lot of time." Some of it, I said. I think we were also becoming people who knew each other well enough for this to actually work. A pause, then her voice came back quieter. That was a generous way to frame 2 years of avoidance. I'm an optimist. You're an engineer. You're constitutionally incapable of optimism. I'm optimistic about load-bearing things. I heard her laugh. That specific laugh, the one that came before she could stop it. She ended things with Marcus that weekend. I didn't ask for details because they weren't mine to manage. And because Claire was someone who handled her own repairs with dignity and didn't need an audience for it. She told me afterward that it had been quieter than she expected, that somewhere in the last few months, they had both been maintaining the shape of a relationship that had already gone hollow. She said she wasn't sad exactly. She said she was tired in the way you get when you've been bracing for a long time and finally put something heavy down. I drove over on Sunday with coffee, the good kind from the small place on Meridian that she liked better than the chain near her apartment. She opened the door in the same sweatpants as before, hair loose, looking like someone who had cried cleanly and come out the other side. She looked at the coffee. "Medium oat, 1 sugar. I know how you take your coffee." "You do." She stepped back to let me in. The apartment felt different. Not empty, lighter. Like a window had been opened somewhere. We sat at her kitchen table. Gerald the succulent had been moved from the windowsill to the table's center, apparently promoted. "How are you?" I asked. Honestly? She wrapped both hands around her cup, relieved, which feels like it should feel worse than it does. Relief is usually honest. She looked at me across the table. So what happens now? I had been thinking about that question. The structural answer, the practical answer, the careful answer. But Claire didn't need those. She needed the true one. "I'd like to take you on a real date," I said. "Somewhere you choose, as somewhere with chairs that don't wobble. And I'd like to do it this week if you're ready. And if you're not ready, I'll wait. But I'm not going back to pretending I don't want to." She considered that with the quiet seriousness she gave everything worth taking seriously. Then she said, "Thursday. Thursday works. And Daniel, yeah?" She reached across the table and pushed Gerald 2 inches toward my side. "Don't overthink the restaurant. I've been on 4 years of the wrong kind of dinner. I can work with anything that has tablecloths and doesn't serve me the same emotional disappointment as the entree." I laughed. She did too. And Gerald sat between us on the table, leaning toward the light, like he had already known how this was going to go. Thursday came with the kind of weather Columbus produces specifically to be inconvenient. Not rain, not snow, just a gray damp cold that made everyone look like they were making a moral compromise by being outside. Claire was ready when I picked her up. Not in a movie-ready way where the door opens and the music swells. In a real way where she pulled on her coat while still talking to someone on the phone, waved at me to come in, mouthed 1 minute, and finished a brief professional conversation about a missing semicolon with more authority than most people speak about anything. When she hung up, she smoothed her coat and looked at me. "Sorry, crises respect no one. A semicolon crisis." You laugh. A misplaced semicolon can change the meaning of a legal clause. She picked up her bag. "I have saved at least 3 people from accidental contractual agreements. You're a hero. I'm a copy editor. The distinction is narrow." We went to a small Italian place I had found by reading actual reviews rather than just choosing the first result, which felt like the minimum standard for a first real date with someone who already knew all my habits. It had candles, good bread, and chairs that were attached to their own legs without moral compromise. Claire looked around when we sat down. Good choice. The chairs? The chairs are excellent. I also like the lighting. She opened the menu. The lighting says the food takes itself seriously without being precious about it. I did not know lighting could communicate that. Lighting communicates everything. You're an engineer. You should know this. We ordered. She got pasta. I got the thing with the short description because Claire had taught me years ago that the longest menu descriptions usually meant they were compensating. Dinner was not smooth the entire way through. That was the part that made it real. There was a moment halfway through the first course where we both reached for the bread at the same time and pulled back and laughed, and then there was a pause that lasted about 4 seconds too long, where neither of us was quite sure what version of us we were allowed to be now. The version that had argued about everything comfortably for 4 years was still present, but standing slightly to the side, making room for something newer and less road-tested. Claire acknowledged it directly, because that was what she did. This is strange, she said, not unkindly. A little, I know everything about you. She tilted her head. And yet it's strange. It's strange because the rules changed. She looked at her glass. I keep instinctively reaching for the version of this where I make a joke and you let me get away with it. You can still do that. Yes, but now it means something different when you let me. I looked at her across the table. Is that bad? She considered it with the honesty she gave everything. No, it's just new weight. I'm learning how to carry it. A small smile. You? Same. I said also, I am choosing not to let you get away with the bread thing. She looked at the bread basket, then back at me. What bread thing? You've taken 3 pieces. I've taken 2.5. The half was generous. It was almost a third piece. The half was structural debris. It doesn't count. She broke off another piece with complete composure. See, this is exactly what I mean. That just happened, and I don't know if it was flirting or just us. Maybe it's both now. Her expression softened into something that was not quite a smile but lived in the same neighborhood. Maybe it is, she said. We walked after dinner because neither of us was ready for the evening to close. Columbus in February does not reward walking, but Claire had decided, and I was not in the business of arguing with her conclusions that night. She tucked her hands into her coat pockets. We walked side by side on a mostly empty block, shoulders occasionally close enough to touch. Can I tell you something? She said. Always. The night Marcus forgot the gallery opening. She paused. I wasn't only upset about Marcus. I looked at her. I was upset because I was standing in my kitchen and I kept thinking, Daniel would have remembered. Daniel would have been there regardless of anything else going on. And I thought that, and then I felt guilty for thinking it. She stared at the sidewalk, which is a strange thing to feel guilty about. Not that strange, it felt disloyal. To Marcus, to both of you. To the version of our friendship where those feelings weren't allowed to be feelings. She looked up at me. I had gotten very good at redirecting. So had I. You were better at it. I had more practice, I said. I'd been doing it longer. She stopped walking. I stopped beside her. We were in front of a dry cleaner with a yellow sign and a display of pressed shirts, which was not the romantic backdrop the moment deserved, but the moment didn't seem to care. How much longer? She asked. I looked at her. The cold had put color in her cheeks, and she was looking at me with the same directness she gave everything, not waiting for me to perform, just waiting for me to be honest. Since the birthday dinner, I said, more or less. There were specific moments after that when I became more sure, and then I became deliberately less sure because it felt like the safer option. And now? Now it doesn't feel like the safer option is actually the safe option. She reached over and tucked her arm through mine, not dramatically, just easily, like the gesture had been on hold for a while and had simply been released. It isn't, she said. We walked the rest of the block like that. Here is the part about best friends that nobody tells you clearly enough. When you fall in love with someone you have been genuinely close to for years, there is an adjustment period that looks disorienting from the outside, but from the inside feels more like orientation. Because you are not learning a new person. You are learning a new angle on a person you already know in full. You already know their flaws and their fears and their specific brand of avoidance. You already know which things they say when they mean something else. You already know when they need space and when they need someone to stay anyway. What you're learning is how to hold all of that with your hands full of something other than just friendship. Claire and I took it deliberately. Not slow because we were uncertain, slow because we both understood that doing this correctly mattered more than doing it fast. She had come out of 2 years of a relationship that had trained her to keep her expectations low. I had come out of 4 years of emotional compartmentalization that had gotten so efficient I barely noticed it happening. We were both doing some renovation, and renovations take time if you want the structure to hold. We went on actual dates, real ones she planned, and ones I planned, and one catastrophically ill-conceived mini golf outing in March, where the windmill mechanism on hole 7 took my ball somewhere that remains a mystery, and Claire laughed for approximately 90 seconds without stopping, and I decided I did not mind losing at mini golf as long as that was what it produced. We had the hard conversations, the ones about Marcus, the ones about my previous relationship that had ended 2 years before Claire and I became friends, the ones about what we each needed from this and what we were each afraid of and what we were willing to do when the fear showed up anyway. Claire was honest in all of them, confrontationally, specifically, sometimes inconveniently honest. She told me when I was being closed off in a way that looked like patience. I told her when she was using humor to avoid something that needed to be sat with. We fought once in early April over something that started as a scheduling conflict and became a conversation about whether I was as present as I claimed to be. She was partially right. I said so. The conversation lasted 90 minutes and ended with both of us on her kitchen floor with our backs against the cabinets, finished arguing, not finished talking. That was the night she said something I have thought about consistently since. I don't want the version of you that manages me, she said. I've had that. I want the version that shows up wrong sometimes and says so. I do show up wrong sometimes. Then keep doing that instead of fixing it so fast I don't see it. I looked at her. You want me to be visibly imperfect. I want you to be real. She leaned her head back against the cabinet. Real includes wrong sometimes. I can work with real. I can't work with smooth. That was Claire. She edited things for a living. She knew the difference between polished and honest. She wasn't interested in drafts that had been cleaned up past the point of truth. By May, her things had started appearing at my apartment. Not by design, by accumulation. A book on the side table, a specific tea in the cabinet, a spare pair of shoes by the front door. Gerald, the succulent, briefly visiting the windowsill above my kitchen sink while she was out of town for a work conference. I was watering Gerald, who was leaning toward the window with what I could only describe as ambition, when Claire called from the hotel in New York. How is he? She asked. Thriving, aggressively. He's an overcomer. He's a succulent. Their bar is low. Survival is the bar for a lot of things. A pause. I miss the apartment. You miss Gerald. I miss the kitchen. A beat. I miss you. I set down the watering can. I miss you too. I'll be back Sunday. I know. Daniel? Yeah? Nothing. I could hear her smiling. Just making sure you were still there. Still here. She was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. Good night. Good night, Claire. She got back on Sunday afternoon. I had made dinner because she always arrived from travel hungry and too tired to decide anything. She came in with her bag over her shoulder and the specific exhaustion of airports, took one look at the kitchen, and sat down at the table with the quiet gratitude of someone who has learned not to take her for granted. Gerald was back on the table. I had moved him as a joke. She noticed and said nothing but moved him to her side with complete seriousness. We ate and talked about the conference and about a project I was working on and about a book she had finished on the flight back that had made her cry in seat 24C to the considerable discomfort of her row. After dinner, she helped clean up without being asked, which was a thing she had started doing that I had noticed and chosen not to comment on because some things are better acknowledged by atmosphere than conversation. When we were done, she leaned against the counter and looked at me with an expression I had learned to read over the last several months. It was the expression she had when she was about to say something true. I want to ask you something, she said. Okay. The night you told me I deserved better. She looked at her hands. Did you know then? I thought about that Tuesday in February. The broken office heat, the disappointing sandwich, the yellow light in her kitchen, her tired eyes and her too quiet voice and Marcus forgetting the gallery opening. Yes, I said. Why didn't you say something then? Because you were in pain and I didn't want what I felt to land like an opportunity. She looked at me. Something moved through her expression. That was very decent of you, she said quietly, or very cowardly. Both, maybe. She paused. I think I would have been ready to hear it then. I know. I met her gaze. I think I knew that too. I was still scared. Of what? Of being wrong about what you meant. I looked at her steadily. And of being right about what I felt. She came around the counter and stopped in front of me, close enough that I had to look down slightly to meet her eyes. You weren't wrong, she said. No, and being right. Still working on not being scared of that. She reached up and straightened my shirt collar, which did not need straightening. An excuse to be precise with her hands. I recognized the gesture. I had learned her tells. We have wasted an enormous amount of time, she said. We have also not wasted it entirely, I said. We know each other. We do. She tilted her face up toward mine. I know which structural diagrams you draw wrong on purpose to make me laugh. You know I put the last book I'm reading face down even though you have repeatedly told me it damages the spine. It does damage the spine. Everything worth reading gets a little damaged. I kissed her, not for the first time, but still in a way that arrived deliberately. She kissed me back with the ease of someone who had been deciding to do this for a long time. When we stopped, her forehead rested briefly against mine. For the record, she said, yeah, you do deserve better too. She pulled back and looked at me clearly. I know I was the one who needed to hear it that night. but you spent 4 years making yourself comfortable in a smaller space than you needed because you thought that was friendship. Her eyes were steady. That's done now. I looked at her for a long moment. Okay, I said. Okay means you believe me. Okay means I'm working on it. She smiled. That's the honest answer. I learned from a difficult woman. Terrible teacher, extremely effective. Gerald leaned against the window behind her, toward whatever light was available. Unbothered and persistent as ever, a year later, Claire moved in, not because the lease on her apartment expired and she needed somewhere to go. On purpose, we had a conversation about it over coffee on a Saturday morning. A real conversation with no anxiety wrapped in jokes. No practicalities used as cover for the actual question. She said she wanted to. I said I wanted her to. We talked about what that would look like and what we each needed and which of her furniture was going to require negotiation. The answer to the furniture question was Gerald, who was non-negotiable, got the best window in the house. The ceramic lamp from her old apartment that I found. Aesthetically problematic stayed because she said it had been her grandmother's. I conceded that immediately, which she noted was unusually quick. You're improving, she said. I'm motivated. She moved in on a Saturday in June. Our friends helped. My sister showed up and found excuses to talk to Claire for most of the afternoon while I carried boxes, which I had expected and had no objections to because they were comparing notes, and I would rather they did that with me present and employed moving furniture than separately at a later date. By evening, the apartment looked like two lives had decided to occupy the same space on purpose. Books doubled on shelves, her red coat next to mine on the hook by the door. Gerald on the kitchen windowsill in the prime position, visibly pleased with the outcome. After everyone left, Claire sat on the floor of the living room surrounded by the last boxes we hadn't gotten to. Yet cross-legged, hair loose, looking around at the organized chaos with an expression that was quiet and content in a way I recognized, because I felt it too. I sat down beside her. How does it feel? I asked. She leaned her shoulder into mine. Like when a sentence finally lands in the right place. She looked around. The whole thing changes. I thought about a Tuesday in February and a kitchen counter, and a mug held in both hands against the cold. About 4 years of carefully maintained distance and the specific exhaustion of keeping a feeling in a small box and telling yourself the box was the responsible choice. I should have said something sooner, I said. Claire turned to look at me. You said something when you meant it. I meant it sooner. I know. She held my gaze. But meaning something and being ready to stand behind it aren't always the same night. She rested her head on my shoulder. You told me I deserved better when I needed to hear it. Everything after that was just us catching up with the truth. I looked at Gerald on the windowsill. He had 3 new leaves since February. We caught up, I said. We did, she laced her fingers through mine. Don't make me wait that long for anything else, I won't. Promise? I kissed her temple. Yes. Outside, the evening was going gold and quiet. Inside, two people sat on the floor of a life they had decided to share, not by accident and not by proximity, and not because the right words had been found at the right time without difficulty, but because one honest sentence had been spoken into the right silence and the right person had answered with the truest thing either of them had ever said. There is a version of this story where I stay quiet, where I keep maintaining a comfortable, careful, smaller version of love and call it loyalty, where I watch Claire give herself to someone who forgets to show up and tell myself that the most decent thing I can do is say nothing. I almost live that version. I think a lot of people do. The thing about loving your best friend is that the risk feels enormous because the stakes are real. This isn't a stranger you met twice whose exit from your life would be an inconvenience. This is the person who already knows you, who knows your 2A, M voice and your most embarrassing opinions and the exact way you go quiet when something is wrong. Losing that is not abstract, is completely and specifically named. But here is what I have learned from the other side of that fear. The love that already knows you is the one that can actually hold you. What would you have done if the person you'd been quietly loving for years turned around and answered your honesty with their own? Tell me in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.